more tonight. Thousands of children each year are brought to child advocacy centers to escape abuse, but thousands more go unreported each time. KLTV 7's Alex Weister spoke with a survivor of abuse who now advocates for other victims out there.
I was unwillingly plucked from that innocence of that peaceful childhood.
Sasha Neulinger was a victim of abuse at just 4 years old, now telling his story to help others tell theirs.
Children cannot advocate for themselves. They're still trying to figure out how the world works. We are the ones that are responsible for identifying what is right and what is wrong.
Neulinger says he spent most of his young adult life reliving his trauma and going through the prosecution process. One of the main reasons he chooses to speak is to highlight the importance of advocacy centers for victims.
Their lives don't have to be defined by the trauma they may have experienced. Kids, even though this is a hard moment, they have an opportunity to reclaim their lives.
Riley Lorenzo with the Children's Advocacy Center of Smith County says that in 2025, the group had over 1,000 children come through the center, with the Texas Department of Family and Protective Services receiving just under 300,000 reports last year. But these numbers only scratch the surface of total cases.
So the average age of disclosure is usually after an adult is 50 years old. And we have a community education team that runs into this a lot.
One of the key things Neulinger says can be done to help prevent cases of abuse or get them reported soon is having tough conversations with children early.
If the child knows the difference between a good touch and a bad touch, they know that if something's happened to them, they've got to speak up so they can get help. It's harder for abusers to find targets.
He tells those that have never spoken out that it's never too late to talk to someone about their experiences.
If you're holding something inside of yourself that is extremely painful, that can be a really lonely, isolating experience.
Alex Weister, KLTV 7 News.
And you can scan the QR code on the bottom of your screen, or you can go to kltv.com, click on the big red box. We've got all the information so that you can learn more about the center and the resources that are out there.